While it may not have the same cultural significance here as in other parts of the country, high school football is a big deal on Staten Island, with the borough producing a plethora of pro talent throughout the years in a region not known for its football prowess.
Staten Island has a rich tradition of high school football, and a lot of teams have been successful in terms of championships through the years, and some teams that didn't win championships have been outstanding, and that's why Staten Island has been a hotbed for high school football.
Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance sports reporters Nick Regina and Charlie DeBiase to discuss the paper's coverage of the borough's high school football season. Thanks for joining me today, guys. Always good to have you on, always good to talk sports, break it up a little bit with all of the hard news that I'm usually covered on here between the migrant protests and the back to school and everything like that. And so it's nice to just chop it up a little bit, and it comes at a good time because, I guess we're still a few weeks away, but we're getting into my favorite time on the sports calendar probably because you've got football in full swing, you've got baseball playoffs underway, basketball and hockey are starting up soon. So I was curious for you guys, what do you think is kind of your favorite part of the sports calendar?
Professionally, I would say right around the Super Bowl time. The Super Bowl, of course, is more than just a game. And, I'm a big Ranger fan. Who are we going to get at the trade deadline? So that the beginning of the year is one of my favorites.
I'll go a couple of weeks after Super Bowl time. There's that little lull after the Super Bowl, and then you get into March Madness. You got all those conference tournaments, NCAA tournament, and then you got to start a baseball season right around the corner, and you're in the middle of hockey and basketball season. So I think that's a close second to right now where we're going to have all four sports going soon.
And that's how I feel too, coming up on that sports equinox that they talk about, right, when you have all four major sports playing at the same time. But that's how I feel too. It's either the fall or the spring for me. It's really the winter and the summer can be a little bit tough. You only have a couple things going on. The weather's either too hot or it's too cold. So the spring and the fall is really always, for me, the best time of the year for sports. So I'm glad to have you guys on. I want to talk about a little high school football. I'm going to be honest at the onset here. I'm not the hugest high school football guy. I'm not following this all the time. I probably haven't been to a game since I was in high school at Curtis. So I'm relying on you all to help me out here. And so I want to just talk a little bit about the Staten Island high school football scene and setting the stage for this, the basics of it. And, there's a lot of high schools on Staten Island. So I was hoping you guys could kind of break down, what does it look like? Do all the schools have a team? Do they all play against each other? Are they playing other boroughs? How does that kind of work?
Things have changed dramatically through the years. There was a time in the 60s and 70s when the Staten Island teams would exclusively play each other. Monsignor Farrell was the only Catholic team back then, and they would play the public schools every year. But that has changed dramatically now as the PSAL and the CHSFL. The Catholics play a 7-game scheduled league. The PSAL now this year has an 8-game scheduled league. They're also afforded 2 non-league games a year. Sometimes the island teams, it's not very often, but sometimes the island teams play each other in a non-league game. To see something, it hasn't happened in years, unfortunately, but to see something like Farrell against Curtis, that would draw a mega attention because they just do not have time to play each other if they don't squeeze them into those non-league games. So that's probably the best way to describe it. Most of the teams are focused towards playing in their league and in their league playoffs, but there is not much crossover between the 4 Catholic teams and the 7 PSAL teams.
Okay, yeah. And so in terms of the season, when do they usually get going with this? Because they start probably in the summer, I imagine, with some of the training camp stuff. And then the season, is it right as the school year starts as well?
Yeah, they start practicing about a month, 6 weeks before the season starts. And right around the time that school starts, about that second week in September, the season gets underway. And just to piggyback off what Charlie said, we should probably explain a little bit because it is confusing. The PSAL, the Public School Athletic Leagues, we have 7 Staten Island schools in that. There's 4 divisions. Our 7 schools are spread among 3 of the divisions. We've got the quadruple A, triple A, double A, and single A. We have 5 teams in the quadruple A, 1 in the triple A, and 1 in the single A. And then in the Catholic League, it's 4 teams. Monsignor Farrell's the only one in the triple A, and then we've got 3 in the double A. So it is a little confusing, sometimes hard to navigate who's where, but just a little back.
So on the A's, which one is the highest division?
The PSAL has changed this probably 2 or 3 times in the last few years now.
It's changing.
So this is the first year of the 4-division system, their realignment. Quadruple A is the highest, and working their way down to single A.
And do we have anyone in the quadruple A, you said?
We have 5 teams.
5
quadruple A.
Okay.
Yep.
And so now in terms, you play the regular season, right? You're in your division. What does the standings look like, the playoffs? How many people are making it, and what does it look like there? Because I know you hear about like state championship games and city championship games. And so like, how does that kind of process play out? What does a team need to do to kind of keep moving forward throughout the year?
The Catholic League, every team makes the playoffs.
Okay.
So basically they're jostling for positioning for when the playoffs start. And then they have, depending on how many teams are in each division, the AAA, the AA, and then there's the single A. There's usually quarterfinal, semifinal, and championship games. Only about 10 years ago, New York State added a Catholic state championship. Archbishop Stepanak, who was in the CHSFL AAA division, they several times have won the Catholic League and advanced to the state championship. Staten Island has not had a team there yet, but it's only been going on for 10 years. As far as the PSAL, they change things around a lot. Nick and I were discussing this before, talking specifically about the quadruple, which is the top tier. They have 14 teams this year. To me, they will go one of 2 ways. They will have the top 8 teams qualify for the playoffs, quarterfinals, semifinals, championship, or the top 12, the last 2 don't make it. Top 12, they would have a first-round bye for the top 4 teams. The other 8 would play, leaving 4 left. Then quarterfinal, semifinal, championship. We have not been alerted to what they are doing this year, but it will probably be one of those 2 things.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so things are still kind of a work in progress.
They probably know.
Yeah. Right, but they have not shared that with us. So, okay, good. So I feel like we've set a good kind of foundation here. I'm feeling a little better about how things are working. So I want to talk a little bit about our coverage and, everything that we do, because obviously local sports is the one thing that we have really held strong on, especially youth sports, as, we're not quite doing the same coverage that we might have done years ago on some other sports things, but that is something that we are still very serious about and have been doing some really good stuff. So I want to talk, one thing that kind of stood out to me was the weekly power rankings that we've been putting out there. So I'm curious, this is a big thing. Anyone who's a sports fan, you watch, ESPN or whatever, it's every week after the NFL season, it's what's the new power ranking? Where's your team? Where'd they go up? Where'd they go down? So I was curious, our decision to kind of do that ourselves, is this the first time that we're doing that? And what is the process kind of like in terms of determining where each team is going to rank on a week-by-week basis?
So everybody loves a nice list, right?
Right.
Everybody loves to check in and see that every week. And I know Charlie and I probably hear it from all the coaches every week when we go out to these games. Why are we here? Why aren't we there? But the power rankings are actually Joe DiModio's brainchild. He does them every week. They're his rankings. He'll check in with me and Charlie for some input, but it's his baby at the end of the day that he comes up with the order.
Gotcha. Yeah. And so what have you heard from some of these coaches who are, what do they say to you when you're out there?
I've heard it both ways. I've heard, why are we number 1? We don't want that pressure this early in the season. We don't deserve it yet. And I've heard, why are we not in the top 5? Well, we won this week with 3-2, whatever we are. There's teams with worse records than us. And going back to what we said before, a lot of it is based on competition, the division you play in. So if you saw this week's, my senior Farrell's number 1, they're 3-2. St. Peter's is 5-0, and they're number 2. And a lot of that is because of the competition that they're playing, their schedule, and the league they're in.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It's interesting. I hadn't really thought about we don't want to be at the top just yet. You got to keep the guys motivated. But you're right. People do love a list. People love to debate. I'm sure that's something that, they're talking about in their classrooms and stuff. Hey, did you see we're number 1 in the rankings this week? Or, their friends are teasing them. Hey, I saw you guys drop to 4. And so stuff like that, I think, is always good, always engaging, but especially in sports is something that people tend to gravitate towards. So that's really cool. I'm glad that we've kind of decided to do that now. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit, either one of you, about some of the standout teams so far this year, who's kind of dominating those power rankings.
I mean, Monsignor Farrell is number 1 for a couple of reasons. They play in the AAA, which to me, between the AAA in the Catholic League and the quadruple A in the PSEL League, the AAA is by far the most talented in terms of all the teams and the competition in it. Stepanak, Farrell played earlier in the year. They're the number 1 team in the state, and Farrell lost to them, I believe, by 5. They were down 21-0, came back 16 points in the second half, had the ball, had a chance to beat them. That weighs heavy in our rankings. They almost beat the number 1 team in the state. They lost to Iona last week. Iona is a team that has won multiple AAA championships. They're a good program. They beat Farrell in the championship 2 years ago. St. Peter's is having one of their best seasons ever. They beat a very good team in St. John the Baptist, but the competition's a little bit less in the AA. So all the things considered, that's what Joey weighs in on when making the ultimate decision on who's 1, who's 2, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. It really does come down to the quality of opponent in a lot of cases and the wins and losses, especially in football. One wrong turn, wrong, the ball bounces the wrong way and the whole game is over. And it's just so many fewer games per season. You know, baseball, it all kind of bears itself out over the course of 100 games or whatever it is, depending on where you're playing. So in football, you really do have to look at how the teams are playing, who they're playing against, as opposed to just the record.
And head-to-head is the biggest thing. Peters and Farrell aren't playing each other this year, but Farrell and Moore played, and Peters and Moore are playing on Sunday. They're going to have big implications on the next week's rankings, so we'll see.
We'll be right back. The Mayor of Maple Avenue is a powerful multi-part podcast about Sean Sinesy, a victim of former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, who was arrested 10 years ago for numerous child sexual abuse charges. The podcast series is written and hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sarah Ganim, who takes listeners into the world of addiction rehabilitation, where society can be quick to celebrate the consequences for abusers while not addressing the needs of their victims. Subscribe now to The Mayor of Maple Avenue wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the players and if there's anyone who has really jumped out to you so far this year, because, you know, we've seen in the past Staten Island has a number of players who are now in the NFL. I mean, you look to the Ravens right now with the J.K. Dobbins injury. You've got Gus Edwards out there who might be a little banged up himself, I think, but he's out there. Tottenville product, I believe, right? Is that right? Yeah. And we've had some other guys from throughout the year. When I was at Curtis, we had Dominique Easley, who then ended up late first-round pick to the Patriots, spent a few years in the league. So throughout the years, we've seen a lot of guys, and you don't really think of Staten Island or New York or the Northeast in general as pumping out football talent. You think about places like Texas and Florida and warm weather states where it's a bigger deal. And so I always found it interesting that we've got some pros coming out of Staten Island. So I was wondering if there's anyone right now that you guys have seen who you think like, hey, maybe that guy has a shot to really make it to the league like some of these other guys have in the past.
I wouldn't want to put that pressure on anybody just yet at this level. Fair. I think there's a handful of guys who will definitely go on to play at Division I schools. We have a handful of guys already at Division I schools. I know Charlie had the story last week on the 2 Curtis guys who are at Temple now, Ahmad Anderson and Sam Martin. One guy that comes to mind to me when you mention NFL, who was a little raw last year, but he's at the University of Buffalo now, is Henry Tabansi. I've heard a lot of talk about him maybe potentially being a guy who's an NFL body, a guy who maybe gets into camp at some point. As far as guys right now, the one guy who his name has come up every week, I see him on the top performers all the time, and he's a first-year football player. I think that's what makes him so intriguing, is More Catholic's Boakai Vikai. I hope I'm not butchering that name. But he's a first-year football player. He's a 6'4" wide receiver. I think he's had a touchdown in every game but one. He's had multiple touchdown games. And I think they say he runs close to a 4.4. So he's an NFL-sized body running at NFL speed in his first year of high school football. That's incredible to me. And I think his potential is through the roof. And he's committed to the University of Maryland right now. So he's already got the D1 offer. And another guy, Tottenville, a freshman who just played his first game, I'm told he's the fastest player on the island already, is Corey Brown, who's supposedly committed to Rutgers. So a couple guys who maybe Division I guys down the road who maybe have an outside chance at making the league one day.
I think that's really exciting when you talk about people from Staten Island. That's something that so many people take pride in, right? And it's just something that's cool. It pops up on your screen on a Sunday and you're like, oh, I know that guy, or I went to high school with that guy. So I always think that that's interesting. Obviously, 99 point whatever % of high school athletes aren't going to play professionally. But Staten Island in a lot of different sports, when you go on, you can go on Wikipedia and look up Staten Island athletes, and there's a longer list than you would think of professional athletes who have come out of this small borough And so I think that that's really exciting, and it's cool to see that the borough has so much young talent out there right now, and I can't wait to see how they progress and move forward with their career, and maybe one day we will be watching them on Sunday. Maybe I'll be, yelling at them for messing up my parlay or something like that. But
there you go.
So I want to talk a little bit about the work that you guys and everyone else have done actually covering these games. Between the public schools and the Catholic schools, there's a lot of teams out there. I imagine there's a lot of games. So how does it go in terms of deciding, which ones we're covering, who's covering what, all that kind of stuff?
Well, in the heyday of high school football and the advance, you got to remember, probably up to 15 years ago, every single game would be covered.
Wow.
It was a time when we had 27 people on staff, and we would cover every single game. We would keep the stats for all those games. Obviously, times have changed. Papers do not have the same type of staffs anymore, stuff like that. So basically, Nick and I and Joe DeModio, we're on top of not only the Staten Island teams, but we have an idea on who the better teams in the league are for the PSAL and CHSFL. And if an island team that is having a good year is playing an off-island team such as Erasmus or, St. Anthony's or, Stepanak, those are the games people are interested in. And if the Staten Island team wins, it's big news. So we judge it on the matchups coming up, how the island team is doing. And, of course, the games, unfortunately, that we do not get to, we still take over the phone. And as long as the coaches supply us the information, they could tell us everything under the sun. I always say to them, we can't get to a game. They're disappointed, but they understand it's different. But I say, if you give me as much information as you can, throw me some quotes and everything like that, I'll make it as if though we were there. And, most of the coaches cooperate, and that's the way it is these days.
And I just want to mention real quick, Joe DeModio, the sports editor. Charlie and I are the only two who are really out there every weekend, but we have a couple freelance guys, Eddie Mayrose and James Special. I don't think I'm leaving anyone out, but who do a great job and help us out and help us get to all these games when obviously a lot of them are played at the same time and we can't be in a million places at once.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And Nick, I'll ask you this one because I asked Charlie something similar the last time he was on to talk Little League with me. And so can you tell us a little bit just kind of what it's like covering a game in person? Like, what are you keeping track of? What are you looking out for? Who are you trying to talk to? Walk us through an average. You arrive at the field. What happens next?
The short answer is we do everything because it's not like NFL game or a college game where you can, even as a fan, you're sitting there and all the stats are coming up on the screen for you. Mm-hmm. So we get there, 30 minutes to an hour before the game. We both like to introduce ourselves to the coaches, maybe see who's not playing that day, or maybe somebody's jumping into the starting lineup who we haven't seen before. So sometimes we'll pick up things before the game even starts. But once the game does start, we're on the sidelines. I have a clipboard in one hand. I have a notebook underneath the clipboard. My clipboard is the stat sheet. I'm on the sideline with the ref, the chain gang, and a pass is thrown from the 28-yard line on one side of the field to the 35 on the other side of the field. We're running up the sidelines with the referee and the chain gang, writing down, doing math in our heads. Yeah. How many yards was that? Who caught it? Who threw it? And the next play is already underway, and you're trying to take notes of, because you don't just want to say it was a 28-yard pass to so-and-so. You want to say, it's a screen pass in the flat. He had a brigade of blockers. Yeah. Cut up a juke move at the 27. And you're writing that and thinking all that, and I'm sure Charlie's done the same. I've come up with my own shorthand that looks like a mess at the end of the game, but at the end of the day, we try to get as many details as we can in there, and the last couple of years, we've also started doing TikToks and Instagram Reels, so I'll have two notebooks in one hand, doing the math in my head, and I'll be holding the phone up with the other hand. So we wear a few different hats on game day for sure.
I hadn't really considered keeping track of the stats in that way because people really are, a little spoiled, I guess, these days when they're watching things on TV or whatever it might be, and they're just seeing the stats pop up. Oh, the QB is 13 for 17 for 146 yards. And it's like, I did all that math in my head and I'm writing it down in the notebook. I'm trying to keep track of it. I guess the good thing is that with football, you get some time in between plays to jot down your notes. If it's basketball, it's probably a little more difficult in that way.
You might think that, but as you're running up the sideline and the chains are moving and you're trying to figure out where the next play is coming from, and if it's the end of a half and they're in 2-minute offense, it's going quicker than you think out there, and it happens fast. And, we try to talk to, if it's an inter-borough game with two island teams, we'll try to talk to both coaches after. We'll try to grab standout players. Maybe if somebody who just had one big play that was pivotal in the game, we'll try to talk to those kids after the game too.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and you were really doing the Lord's work out there. It sounds like, especially with like we discussed earlier, kind of the staffing levels not being what they once were, and we see that across all beats now. Is that you kind of are a one-man show in a lot of cases where you're taking notes, you're taking photos, you're doing social, you're doing this, you're doing that, and so it sounds like you guys, and I know I've read some of the coverage. You guys are doing an incredible job with that, with what's provided to us. So. One thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something interesting. So I led with this. I really mostly watch NFL football, and I watch a little bit of college every now and then if it's on at the bar or I'm with a group of friends or something like that, but I don't go out of my way for it. The high school game, from what I understand, is a bit different in terms of, obviously, you're not going to have the same quality of play, but as a result of that, a little bit different stylistically in terms of what you would see teams run, whether it's on offense or defense, or special teams might look a little different or not be as as effective as you might see at higher levels. So I was wondering if maybe Charlie, if you could just talk to me a little bit about what it's like watching a high school game compared to watching maybe college or NFL.
Yeah, I mean, the physicality and the speed are obviously much, much different. There's a couple of things that are different in the high school game. For instance, in the NFL, a holding penalty, regardless of what the play is, whether it was rushing or passing, it's 10-yard penalty from the line of scrimmage. But in high school, if the running back ran 20 yards and the infraction took place in yard 7, it's marked off from there.
Oh, so they only lose 3 yards net.
Well, I mean, this is one of the crazy things to top on what Nick said. You don't have much time because there's only 40 seconds in between plays. But so the running back would get 7 yards, and you would mark off the penalty from the spot of the foul.
Right.
So +7, and then back 10. So yes, it would be.
So they only lose 3 yards instead of losing 10 yards.
Depending on where it is.
From where the spot of the foul.
That's right.
Right.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yes. So that's one of the differences. The little things like the NFL, a touchback is the 25-yard line. It was 20 for years. The Catholic and public school league, it's the 20-yard line. I don't know anything about
as far as the style of play, I would say it's not as vertical as the NFL and the college game. It's more sideline to sideline, a lot of short passes in the flat, a lot of screen passes. Yeah. The one thing I have seen carry over from the higher levels is the RPO, the run pass option. I feel like everybody's running RPO now. And the last 10, 15 years maybe in the NFL, you see a lot of the college game influencing the NFL game. Mm-hmm. And I think that's trickled down. And you're seeing a lot of these concepts that are run at higher levels being put into use on the high school field now.
Right.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, the kids are learning based on what they're seeing, right? And you adapt to the new styles. It's like those videos you see online of like third graders.
Baby Gronk.
Yeah, Baby Gronk and all these kinds of things you see, they idolize and try and imitate the players that they're watching at the highest level. How is the kicking? How is the special teams? That's something that I always think about, because sometimes in the NFL it's bad watching the kickers. So I can't imagine. Then you get to college and then down to high school. Like, are these? I saw in one of our articles, I think recently, someone hit like a 42-yarder, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good. Or is that common? Do I not realize what's going on here? How is the kicking?
It's not so common to have a great kicker. A lot of teams you'll see go for 2. They don't even have a guy who kicks extra points. But some of them, there's really good kickers. I know Charlie had a good matchup last week of 2 good kickers. I think somebody hit a 47-yard field goal, I think, recently.
Wow. The Giacomo for Farrell, yeah.
Yeah, so there are some kids with big legs, for sure. A lot of schools take their best soccer player and make him the kicker.
Right. Yeah.
But there are some guys who are definitely doing it at a high level.
That's interesting. But you would say generally there's a higher rate of 2-point conversion?
I would say for the games that I've covered, most of them are going for 2.
What about the kickoffs? Are they getting touchbacks on a lot of them, or are they running these all out?
Yeah, I mean, the Farrell, the Giacomo Farrell for the last 15 years has had an exceptional kicker who has continually got touchbacks, hit field goals. They never miss extra points. Cottonville has always had a kicker. Who else? War Catholic has been very successful with their kicker in recent years. I would say overall it's probably 50-50. Former Susan Wagner legendary coach Al Paterzo didn't believe in kicking. They never kicked while he was the head coach. And he was the head coach 34 years, PSEL all-time wins leader. And I think his theory is, why would you go for 1 when you could go for 2?
Yeah.
And they never ever had a kicker.
ahead of his time in some ways. A lot of the coaches in the NFL are starting to feel that way as well. So you just put out this feature on Port Richmond High School's head coach, who has been there for nearly 2 decades now, right? And so I was wondering, what made you want to do this story, and tell us a little bit about it and what you learned in your conversations with him.
So I did a story a few weeks ago on a sophomore at Port Richmond, Kasim Cromwell, who's a really good player, maybe their best player. There's a lot of great underclassmen this year. When I was doing the story, I noticed the coach was a little hesitant to put the kid's name out there, and I didn't really understand why, because I always feel like most exposure is good exposure at this level. And he explained to me that some of his kids have been poached by other schools in the transfer portal, so to speak, and he was afraid to put the kid's name out there because he was afraid other schools would come calling. So he brought it up a couple other times at games that I covered since. He mentions the transfer rules and how it's affected his program. And originally the story wasn't going to go the way that I wound up angling it. It was going to be a coach who was upset about the transfer rule. And after talking to him, I realized there was a lot more to it than just a coach complaining. It was this guy who's been doing it for 20 years, who shows up every day, and overnight his job kind of changed because Port Richmond was this kind of legendary program. They went undefeated in 2008. They won a city title, not just the best team on Staten Island, the best team in the city. And in recent years, they've struggled to win a handful of games every year. He was 31-6 his first 3 years, and I think he's got 60 wins in the 15 years since. I thought it was important to focus on the fact that this guy shows up to work every day for almost 20 years now, and he's loyal to this school and this program, and he had a lot to say, and I thought we did a fair job painting that picture for everybody.
You did a fantastic job. I would definitely recommend our listeners, anyone who has not read that yet, to go check it out. And so, sticking with Port Richmond, I know that they just got a new football field there, right? And that was something that we had been covering. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it's been years, right, that they've been figuring it out on the fly. And so can you tell us a little bit about what was going on there?
Yeah, so 4 years in the making. That field was supposed to be ready in 2 years, I think it was, and setbacks and tons of problems kind of forced their hand. I was telling you before that they were practicing on what amounted to basically a 50-yard vacant lot, and then they were showing up and playing on a 100-yard field every week, and that's dangerous for the kids. It's not helping them get any better, and now they have this beautiful new football field, a beautiful surrounding track, and I'll take this moment to plug a series that we have coming. We're going to be going around to all 11 football schools and doing stories on their football fields, because most of them have gotten renovations in recent years, multi-million dollars, and they're beautiful now. They're playing on these awesome surfaces, and a school like Port Richmond, where they were struggling with their football program a little bit, to now have that field is a huge kind of feather in their cap.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we go, Charlie, I just wanted to ask you one more thing, similar to what we had talked about when I had you on to talk about the Little League tournaments that we were hosting here on Staten Island. You've been doing this job for a long time. You've seen a lot. You know so much about Staten Island's local sports scene. So I was wondering, who were some of the best high school football teams that you've covered throughout the years? Who really stands out to you, and what made them so special?
You got to understand that Staten Island has a rich tradition of high school football, and a lot of teams have been successful in terms of championships through the years, and some teams that didn't win championships have been outstanding. There's a couple of teams that stand to mind that I've actually covered. 1991, Monsignor Farrell won a championship, had top-notch players, Ben Cerullo the coach. A year later, Susan Wagner, 1992, finished 12-0, unofficial state champions. Obviously, is not something that every school has. Then in the later years, both of Tottenville's championship teams in 97 and 03. I'm not sure if they had any NFL players. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had fantastic teams. Jimmy Munson was a great coach. And then, of course, Curtis has the most PSCL city championships ever now, 7. And the last 2 with Pete Gambardella behind the wheel as the head coach in 16 and 17. Those were tremendous championship games, with Ahmad Anderson making the game-winning touchdown catch with about a minute to go, and now he's playing at Temple and stuff. So you really just can't pinpoint one. Staten Island has a number of teams that have had exceptional seasons, and that's why Staten Island has been a hotbed for high school football.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and keep up all the good work.
Thanks for having
us. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit SILive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.